We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and this is part 2 to our 2-part video review of the Dead Sea Scrolls. A new translation, the Dead Sea Scrolls, a comprehensive translation of the controversial ancient scrolls with material never before published, all translated, including the most recently released texts, translated and with commentary by Michael Wise, Martin Abegg Jr. and Edward Cook. Contents. Contents continued. Yet again. And finally the indices, bibliography, index of manuscripts and index of reference. Preface. The authors of the book, of this particular book, on the completion of their work, were acutely conscious of being part of a larger academic enterprise and wished to acknowledge their debt not only to each other but also to the greater world of Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship. They of the new generation acknowledged the broad shoulders upon which they stood in the hope of furthering the understanding of these ancient texts. Although the names of the scholars of the first generation would become familiar as readers enter into the discussions that follow within the book, let these take their proper places from the beginning: J.T. Millick, John Strugnell, John Allegro and Andre Dupont-Sommer. The authors also acknowledge the in-depthness to the academic fathers at whose feet they were introduced to the intricacies and excitement of Dead Sea Scroll studies, and they list all those people. And finally to the editor at Harper San Francisco, Mark Chimsky. This book is more of a beginning of research on the scrolls than it is a completion. Many of the conclusions reached in the following pages will stand the test of time and become foundation stones for subsequent generations of students. Other affirmations, few they hoped, would be revised, overturned and eventually forgotten. The field of Dead Sea Scrolls research is yet young, but therein lies its excitement. Out of that sense of excitement, the author offers this volume, June 7, 1996. In a preface to the revised edition, generations are a relative thing. In the Bible, a generation represents 40 years. In 21st century America, most people would probably put the number close to 20. In Dead Sea Scrolls research, a generation is more like 10 years. So rapid is the life cycle, so compressed the span from young to old, from new to outdated. This revised edition of their translation therefore appears nearly a full generation after the first, and in that time much has happened of which they were keen to take account of. Perhaps the most obvious change in the year since preparation of the first edition, 1994 to 95, can be stated in a single word: publication. The official scholarly editions of virtually all the scrolls have now appeared. When they went into press in 1995, Discoveries in Judean Desert Volume 10 was of recent appearance. Since then, all but one of the remaining volumes have finished their often extended gestation and come forth into the world. Discoveries now numbers 39 volumes. Simple arithmetic will thus lead to two conclusions. First, everyone interested in the Bible and the biblical world, in Jesus and the New Testament, in Christianity and Judaism, owes a large debt of gratitude to the many scholars who laboured to produce those volumes, and most especially to the editor-in-chief of the project since the early 1990s, Emmanuel Tov. The authors owe that debt personally and especially, and they say thank you. Second, arithmetic, or put precisely subtraction, reveals that they as authors lacked official editions of many of the texts in this book when they produced the first edition. They may do as best as they could. They used preliminary editions and photographs, and from this and that, from there, and in particular the several fascicles of the work edited by Martin Abegg Jr. and Ben Zion Watcholder, a preliminary edition of the unpublished Dead Sea Scrolls. Nevertheless, they certainly did not possess anything like the riches of texts and tools that have appeared in the past 10-year generation, and it is that richness that calls forth this revised edition. This edition continues the theme of arithmetic, or put precisely, of addition. They have added numerous texts, partly because various critics suggested that they should, but mostly because their publisher had generously agreed that they could. Many of these appeared in some form in the German version of their book, others are making their debut. The intention in making these editions was consistent with the intention of the first edition: completeness, so far as practical matters would allow. By practical, they meant especially as far as the interest of general readers would dictate. Not every exiguous fragment of each fragmentary text appears in this book, but if in their judgment and the editors, general readers would like to read it, or even just know it exists, it is here. They have revised virtually every translation and every text introduction, often substantially. These revisions are an effort to take account of a generation's worth of change in the field of Dead Sea Scrolls research, and to give accounts as well. Some texts had to be pulled apart and reassembled as several works. In other cases, seemingly separate works needed to be combined. In every such matter, they have followed their own judgment, while naturally giving considerable weight to the published ideas and conclusions of many other scholars. An expanded bibliography made their deepest intellectual debts explicit. They had also responded to the suggestion of numerous users of the first edition to add page headers so as to alleviate troublesome navigation through the text. Thus, readers have a different, and the authors hope, better books than the first edition. Doubtless flaws of omission or commission remain despite their best efforts. They sincerely request that readers communicate to them about those flaws. Let them know about it. Say that a future edition may perhaps take advantage of those insights. Michael O. Wise, Martin G. Abegg Jr. and Edward M. Cook, March 31, 2005. The Dead Sea Scrolls. 1. Prolegomena. Introduction. Like Shangri-La, the terms Dead Sea Scrolls has the power to evoke images and emotions, even in those who have only a vague idea of what they are. The term is redolent of enigma, of intrigue, perhaps even of sacred mysteries. Hovering in the background are images of caves, scrolls, barren deserts, and intense scholars hunched over tiny scraps of leather. A closer acquaintance with the scrolls does not dispel the air of mystery, because even when all the documents are read, translated and explained, huge areas of uncertainty remain. Who wrote the scrolls and when? What purpose did they serve, and what influence did they have? And what do they mean for us? Scholars still give different answers to all these questions. The authors of this book felt that the right answers are closer than ever. For decades, specialists have been able to study many of the scrolls, but not all of them. They reached conclusions that could not take into account all of the documents, many of which remained unavailable until recently, sometime probably prior to this book. Now all of the texts are available. Some of them support and some undermine cherished theories about the scrolls and their origins. Some of them suggest that long discarded hypotheses may have been amazingly accurate. Others suggest new and subtle shadings of old interpretations. Most important, the scrolls, now that we can see them all, or they can see them all, everyone can see them all, testify to the astonishingly rich and fertile literary culture that gave birth to the foundational religious documents of Judaism and Christianity. We find here previously unknown stories about biblical figures such as Enoch, Abraham and Noah, including a work explaining why God asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. A dozen writings that claim Moses as the author, yet are not a part of our Bibles, have come forth from the caves. Newly deciphered scrolls reveal ancient doctrines about angels, while others claim to be revelations by angels themselves, including the Archangel Michael. Among the scrolls are never before seen psalms attributed to King David and to the leader of the conquest of the Holy Land, Joshua. These scrolls include extra-biblical prophecies by Ezekiel, Jeremiah and Daniel. The last word of the patriarchs, Joseph, Judah, Levi, Naphtali and Qumran, father of Amram, father of okay, didn't seem to say his name there. The Scrolls team began well, publishing in the first volume of text in 1995. Discoveries in the Judean Desert, Volume 1, Qumran Cave 1, abbreviated as DJD1. This book contained additional fragments from the first cave. The Bedouin had entered pieces of documents that had turned up after the first 7 scrolls were removed. Work of this nature is of necessity slow, wrote G.L. Harding, director of the Jordanian Department of Antiquities, in the foreword. It may well be a few years before the series can be completed. Harding could not have foreseen that 40 years later the work would still not be complete. What explains the achingly slow pace of publication? For one thing, the work required considerably more time than originally estimated. The first 7 scrolls were all more or less intact, although some were in better repair than the others. The publishing program consisted of simply publishing photographs of the texts, which were, and still are, legible to anyone who can read ancient Hebrew. But undamaged scrolls like these turned out to be the exception. Most were fragmentary, and it required considerable painstaking work even to figure out which fragments originally belonged to the same scroll. That work necessarily had to be done before even preliminary translations and interpretations could be issued. This work, by the way, still continues, and new joins, ways of connecting the fragments, are discovered from time to time. We propose, the authors of this book proposed a few themselves in the pages that follow. The work of collecting and joining fragments then required much painstaking work and not a little ingenuity. The original team did this phase of its work well, but in hindsight it is clear that the task was too large and the team too small. The second volume of DJD came out in 1961 with text from Qumran, and DJD3 followed in 1962, containing all the text from caves 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 and 10, the so-called minor caves, for comparatively few scrolls were found in these caves. DJD4, 1965, contains a single manuscript of the Book of Psalms from Cave 11. Only with DJD5, 1968, were several manuscripts from the Mother Lode, Cave 4, issued. At this point, the already slowing pace of publication ground to a complete halt as a result of the Six-Day War of June 1967, the Israeli-Arab Six-Day War. The Palestine Archaeological Museum, where the scroll fragments were stored, had become the property of the State of Israel. The members of the scrolls publication team, most of whom held decidedly pro-Arab convictions, were reluctant to continue under Israeli auspices, even after the authorities assured them they could continue their work without interference. Eventually, the Israelis and the team worked out an agreement, and the team published DJD6, containing a number of minor texts. In 1997, by this time, however, the scholarly community was growing increasingly unhappy with the official scrolls team. The scrolls that had already been published had revolutionized study of the Bible, early Judaism and early Christianity. The thought that hundreds of texts, more than half of what had been found, had never been seen outside a small circle of privileged editors was maddening. The academic scandal of the century, in the words of Britain's Geza Vermes. In fact, after a modus operandi, or them having some sort of motive, operational motive, had been reached with Israel, there was no good reason why the rest of the text could not be published rapidly. The team had finished most of the initial work of reconstruction by 1960, but they had come to feel that a simple publication was no longer enough. The scrolls had become an entire subdiscipline of ancient history, and a proper publication now had to include vast analyses, large synthesis and detailed assessments, placing every fragment in its place in the history of Judaism, Christianity and humankind. This was a daunting task for a large team. For a small team, it was simply impossible. And although the team had slowly begun to increase its size, taking on a few Israeli members and select graduate students, those who studied with team members in the 1980s, it still refused to allow other scholars access to the text. In academia, of course, knowledge is power, and the scroll editors enjoyed these immensely. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, complaints about the slow pace of publication snowballed. Team members continued to publish individual texts from time to time, but control of the process always remained in their hands. Even when a text was published, it seemed like noblesse oblique, and the perceived arrogance behind the slow pace of publication acted as a catalyst, goading outsiders to work at achieving unfettered access. New obstacles to publication had arisen as well. Several members of the original team had died, and others were battling poor health. Finally, in the early 1900s, the monopoly of the official team was broken, both from within and from without. In 1990, John Strugnell, head of the Scrolls team since 1987, was forced to resign by the Israel Antiquities Authority for derogatory comments he made about Judaism. Was he being anti-Semitic, was he? The authority put Israeli scholars in charge of the project, and they began to invite more scholars to join the team, intending to speed up the pace of publication. But outside forces played a decisive role. The official team had compiled a concordance, a comprehensive word list that also provides the context in which each word listed occurs, of all the words in the unreleased text. Until now, they had a limited use of the concordance themselves, but before Strugnell's departure, he allowed certain academic libraries to receive copies of the concordance. Since the concordance listed each word along with one or two on either side of it, theoretically one might reconstruct not only entire lines but entire scrolls. A graduate student at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Martin Abegg, with his advisor Ben Zion Wacholder, put the theory into practice. He carried out the reconstruction with the aid of a desktop computer. In the first volume of hitherto unreleased scrolls was published in September 1991. The publication was a bombshell, and it triggered another. Later that same month, the director of the Huntington Library in Southern California, USA, William Moffat, announced that the library had in its possession photographs of all of the unreleased Dead Sea Scrolls, and that scholars would be allowed full access to them. These twin attacks on the monopoly of the Scrolls team proved decisive. After initially threatening legal action in November 1991, the new editor-in-chief of the official team, Emmanuel Tov, announced that all scholars would have free and unconditional access to all the photographs of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This victory over scholarly secrecy and possessiveness made the book you hold in your hands possible. So we came across research where the Roman Catholic Church were shocked. Oh no, they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh no, they're going to translate it. Oh no, it might be different to what we're pushing. We don't want that. We don't want the public to know what's actually written in there, because it may change everything. May make us look silly because it says something completely different. So apparently they sent a Roman Catholic person in there to slow it down or something like that, or keep an eye on what's going on and report and all this sort of stuff. It's just what we found through our research. We can't remember his name, but there's like footage of him and photos and all that sort of stuff online. How the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. What exactly are the Dead Sea Scrolls? The objects themselves are documents written with a carbon-based ink, usually on animal skins, although some are inscribed on papyrus. The scrolls were written right to left, using no punctuation except for an occasional paragraph indentation. No periods, commas, quotation marks, or any of the other reader helps to which these authors were so accustomed. Indeed, in some cases there are not even spaces between words. The letters simply run together in a continuous stream. The codex, the early form of the book, with pages bound on one side, had not yet been invented, so the pages or columns were written consecutively on the scroll. To read them, one slowly unrolled the scroll and then, to be polite, re-rolled it, like rewinding a modern videotape. Not a few of the scrolls testify that the ancients failed to rewind as often as we do, as these authors did. The scrolls are written in several languages and half a dozen scripts, and though all are religious texts within that category, the contents are amazingly varied. The languages used in the scrolls. Prior to the discovery of Dead Sea Scrolls, the dominant view of the Semitic languages of Palestine in this period was essentially as follows. Hebrew had died. It was no longer learned at mother's knee. It was known only by the educated classes, just as educated medieval Europeans knew Latin. Rabbinic Hebrew, the written language of the Mishnah, Tosefta, and other rabbinic literature of 200 CE, and later was considered a sort of scholarly invention. Artificial, not the language of life put to the page. The spoken language of the Jews had in fact become Aramaic. Even in this tongue, literary production was thought to be meagre. Accordingly, prominent scholars writing in the mid-1940s on the eve of the scroll's discovery expressed doubts that the composition of a Semitic gospel was even possible. Edgar Goodspeed, for example, argued, "The gospel is Christianity's contribution to literature. It is the most potent type of religious literature ever devised. To credit such a creation to the most barren age of a never very productive tongue like Aramaic would seem the height of improbability. For in the days of Jesus, the Jews of Palestine were not engaged in writing books. It is not too much to say that a Galilean or Jerusalem Jew of the time of Christ would regard writing a book in its native tongue with positive horror. Footnote indication there. Edgar Goodspeed, The Original Language of the Gospels and Contemporary Thinking about Jesus, an anthology, editor Thomas S. Kepler, New York, Abingdon, Cokesbury, 1944. Maybe that's page 59. The discovery of the scrolls swept these linguistic notions into the trash bin. Here were hundreds and hundreds of texts, tangible evidence of substantial literary productivity. Apart from copies of biblical books, about 1 out of 6 of the Dead Sea Scrolls is inscribed in Aramaic. Clearly, the writing of an Aramaic gospel was eminently possible, yet the vast majority of the scrolls were Hebrew texts. Hebrew was manifestly the principal literary language for the Jews of this period. The new discoveries underlined the still living, breathing, even supple character of that language. A few texts pointed to the use of Hebrew for speech as well as writing. These works, for example a sectarian manifesto, text 100, displayed a missing link type of Hebrew, intermediate between the form of Hebrew used in the Bible and that used by the rabbis. Rabbinic Hebrew was shown to be no invention, but simply a development from ordinary spoken Hebrew of biblical times. The scrolls have therefore proven that late Second Temple Jews used various dialects of Hebrew along with Aramaic. These two languages are closely related. Aramaic is the Hebrew as features to Italian, they're like sister languages. For writing, however, they generally try to imitate biblical Hebrew, an older form of the language. The situation would be analogous to trying to write in a style of Elizabethan English. Not all the scroll writers could perform this feat equally well, so the correctness of the Hebrew varies considerably. Modern scholars actually appreciate the mistakes more than the daft performances because the mistakes arise out of the writer's own language usage. The written form teaches us about the spoken. A small minority of the scrolls was written in Greek. The discovery has vouchsafed us a further glimpse into the linguistic complexity of first century Jewish society, Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek. Each was being used in particular situations of speech and writings. They were only just beginning to discover some of the rules for those uses to bring to bear the more sophisticated perspectives of sociolinguistics. Since, as noted above, many of the Dead Sea Scrolls have but recently become known, or at that time, to a wide range of scholars, and they were presently at an early stage of linguistic understanding. Scripts used for writing the scrolls. The script most commonly used to write these texts, whether Hebrew or Aramaic, has come to be called the Jewish script. Before the discovery of the scrolls, they knew relatively little about it. The Jewish script proves to be a development of an earlier script of the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, one that has been known to scholars since the 19th century. Perhaps surprisingly, that script had originally been used only for Aramaic, not for Hebrew. In the time of the scholars, it became to be used for Hebrew as well. Whereas Hebrew won the battle of the languages, when it came to script, Aramaic was the victor. The scrolls reveal various forms of the Jewish script: beautiful, careful, chancellery hands, decorated with serifs and formal varieties, cursive, i.e. illegible and extremely illegible types. From this script later developed the medieval scripts used to write Hebrew, and one descendant became that most often used in modern printed Hebrew Bibles and books. Also surviving among a small group of the scrolls, however, is a developed form of the ancient Hebrew script that the Aramaic form had supplanted among the Jews, or overcame, or replaced, taken over among the Jews. This script had been the standard in the days of David and Solomon and down on to the time of Jeremiah. In our period, or their period, this form of writing, known as Paleo-Hebrew, was especially used for copies of the books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and of Job. Presumably the scribes who chose it regarded those books as the oldest of the Hebrew scriptures. Paleo-Hebrew was therefore most appropriate. The scrolls have shown then that the Jews of Jesus' day used scripts descended from both earlier Aramaic and earlier Hebrew scripts. In addition, 3 different cryptic or secret scripts have emerged before the discovery of the scrolls. They had never seen these forms of writing. Although cryptic writing as a concept goes back as far as the 3rd millennium BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, these are the oldest forms associated with Hebrew ever discovered. The most important of these secret scripts has come to be called cryptic script A. Perhaps 50 scrolls use cryptic script A either entirely or for marginal notes. See especially the Sage to the Children of Dawn, text 65, and the Phases of the Moon, text 69. As Edgar Allan Poe once noted in an essay, a few words on secret writing. Few persons can be made to believe that it is not quite an easy thing to invent a method of secret writing which shall baffle investigation. Yet it may be roundly asserted that human ingenuity cannot concoct a cipher which human ingenuity cannot resolve. Cryptic script A likewise has yielded up its secrets to modern scholars, who have discovered that it is a simple substitution cipher, that it is each symbol of the cryptic alphabet corresponds to one symbol of the regular Hebrew alphabet. Contents. As noted, all the scrolls, with a few minor exceptions, are Jewish religious texts. In a way, the fact that all the writings are religious is surprising. Why are there no copies of works on agriculture or animal husbandry, on secular practical topics? The Jews in this period were an agricultural people. Wouldn't they want to read such secular books? Immediately, then, as we consider the contents of the scrolls, we begin to perceive an element of intentionality in their being gathered and hidden in caves. This is not a random collection of what there was, not a chance sweeping from this bookshelf and that. These religious writings are of 2 different kinds, the biblical and the non-biblical. The biblical texts are copies of the Hebrew Bible, the religiously neutral term for the Christian Old Testament, forming about 1/4 of the total number of scrolls in the collection. The caches include a copy of every one of the books of the Jewish Bible, except, apparently, the Book of Esther. The Dead Sea Bible is the oldest group of Old Testament manuscripts ever found, at least 1,000 years older than the traditional Hebrew texts from the early medieval period that have been the basis of all our modern Bible translations. In many cases, the scrolls have supported the traditional text of the Bible, but in others, what they say in particular verses, their readings agree with non-traditional versions like the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the ancient translation of the Old Testament into Greek that was used among Egyptian Jews. There's meaning that they were in Egypt. They were Hellenized Jews, but they were brought into, or they lived in Egypt and did their translations to the Greek. Sometimes the scrolls preserve readings we never knew existed. At other times the scrolls contain differences more profound than the reading of the individual verses. They preserve editions of entire biblical books that differ from the traditional text. For example, 2 forms of the book of Jeremiah have emerged from the caves, one agreeing with that usually printed and translated in modern Bibles, the other about 15% shorter and with the contents in a different order. Several versions of the book of Psalms have likewise come to light. These versions differ strongly from one another, in particular from Psalm 90 onwards. Psalms 90 and 150 are arranged in different orders, and what is more, some of the manuscripts include additional previously unknown psalms. The content and form of the book of Psalms was manifestly in flux in the period when the scrolls were written. To read some of these additional psalms attributed to David, turn to Apocryphal Psalms text 17 and Apocryphal Psalms of David text 151. Footnote below. The biblical scrolls from Qumran have now been translated and published as the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, the oldest known Bible translated for the first time into English, edited by Martin Abegg, Peter W. Flint and Eugene Ulrich, HarperCollins, 1999. Again, there's a lot more information here, but what we want to do is we want to try and find, this is the right book, right? Might be page 200 and something that we're going to look at. We can remember. Okay, go back a bit further. Because we came across something that shocked us, astonished us, right? What was written there about the Christ, about Paul, from these Essenes or this Qumran community. See if we can find it. Okay, go back a bit further. Yeah, pretty sure it's about 184 to 200 or something like that. When we were looking at it before. Okay, I'm just going to have a look through here. Pretty sure it's this book. Okay, I'm going to go back because to check it out 200. Don't think it's actually that one. Okay, it's like hymns. They look like hymns. Community hymns. Okay, we don't think it's here. Gonna go 184. Try to remember from memory when we looked at it before. I'm pretty sure it isn't. Okay. It doesn't look like it's here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we might go to the back and have a look in the index. That way we'll find it better, faster. Okay, go back. Pretty sure it's this book. Okay. Okay. Probably no. I'm sure there's an index here. Okay, go back here. I'm not too sure if this is actually that book. I'm pretty sure it was. Okay, let's go back. Check out the contents page again. Pretty sure it was this book. Okay. I'm not sure if this was actually this book. We're pretty sure it was. We came across it by accident. Okay, I'm going to go have a look at 204. No. Where did we see that? I think we're talking about false prophet and all that sort of stuff. Commentaries on Isaiah. Don't think it was earlier than that. Story about Exodus. Have a look here. See what this has to say. No, might not actually be this book. We may have mistaken it for another one like this by these authors. I'm not too sure. where it mentions about the Christ, saying that he was just an ordinary man and so forth, and it talked about Saint Paul, the Apostle Paul, and they regarded him as the Antichrist. And we're just thinking, was that possibly before, when he was Saul, or was it, are they pointing at him after? Okay, might take us a while to find it, so we might end this here, shorter than we intended to. And then bring you the third part when we actually find it. Very interesting. Okay, it's going through the different books of the Bible, reworking of Genesis and Exodus. Samuel, commentaries on Isaiah, Hosea, commentary on Nahum, commentaries on Psalms, and a commentary on selected verses. It's where they held James the Just in quite high esteem, and then they mentioned about the Christ, and then they mentioned about Paul. And they were speaking against them. Had something against them. Okay, we're going to leave it there until we find it. We'll come back with part 3 with that which we found, because we could be completely in the wrong book. We only had looked at 2 of them, this one and the Dead Sea Scrolls A New. Let's have a look at this one, the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. Could be in that one, but we're not too sure. We don't think so. Okay, we're going to go have a look for the index at the back. Endnote, maybe. Nope. You're pretty sure it's from these authors, these three authors. They make a comment of what's contained. There's the Apostle Paul and the Christ. Christ not so much in a really nasty way, but Apostle Paul, them saying they regarded him as the Antichrist. Yeah, don't know if it's this book. Don't think it is this book actually, but we'll have to stop here and have a look. The rest we'll be here all day. Okay, so if you enjoyed this video so far, give us a like, subscribe to us, and put your comments below this video, and then go share this video with all your family, friends and others. And we will see you in part 3. If we can't find what we're looking for, we should have wrote it down, in one of these 2 books of these 3 authors.